Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Shadow of the Vampire. Now, Shadow of the Vampire is a postmodern horror drama / black comedy released in 2000. The film was directed by Elias, who prior to this directed a really interesting experimental horror film in the early 90s called Begotten. The movie was also written by Katz and produced by Nicolas, who doesn't star in the movie unfortunately, but he is one of the film's producers. And the film is a fictional retelling of the making of the silent horror classic Nosferatu, which is the oldest surviving adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now, I already reviewed this movie 10 years ago, back in 2012, for a special I did called Dracula Week, where I reviewed movies that were either based on or inspired by Dracula. That review is still up, however it's no longer public. It's now marked as unlisted, but you can still see it on the Dracula Week playlist, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. Now, I'm reviewing this movie as part of my series of Nosferatu reviews. Recently, I reviewed the original film from 1922, and then me and my friend Jeremy reviewed the 1979 remake from Werner Herzog, and then we reviewed the 1988 Italian film Nosferatu in Venice, which is considered to be sort of a pseudo-sequel to the Werner Herzog film. And I decided to count Shadow of the Vampire as almost like the fourth film in the loosely connected Nosferatu franchise, which is not an official franchise at all, but because all four of these films are tangentially connected, I decided to count them as one franchise. Because I honestly do think that you can count Shadow of the Vampire as almost like a spiritual / metafiction sequel to Nosferatu. Not that there's any continuity between the two films, they're clearly in two separate universes, but this movie does recreate several shots from the original film, and even outright uses some footage from Nosferatu. And while this is a standalone film, had you seen the original Nosferatu, I think that would give you such a better context. Now, like I said, the film is about the making of Nosferatu, however, the story itself is a complete work of fiction. This is not historically accurate at all. Now, most of the characters in this movie were real people, however, these are completely fictionalized versions of these people. Especially considering that several of the people that you see die in this film actually would go on to have careers after Nosferatu. So really what this is it's a what-if / alternate history kind of story, but the main premise of the film is what if actor Max Schreck, who played Count Orlok or Count Dracula in the original Nosferatu, what if he really was a vampire? So the plot of Shadow of the Vampire is it's set in 1921 and it follows German filmmaker F.W. Murnau, who wishes to adapt Bram Stoker's novel Dracula for the big screen. However, Stoker's widow refuses to sell them the rights, so he decides to make the movie anyway. He just changes the name of the vampire from Count Dracula to Count Orlok. And obsessed with authenticity, Murnau cast this mysterious man named Max Schreck to play Count Orlok, and as far as the rest of his cast and crew are concerned, Schreck is just a highly dedicated method actor who completely disappears into the role he's playing. But when the film's cinematographer comes down with a mysterious illness and people start disappearing off set, it becomes apparent that Murnau has made a bargain with a real vampire in order to create the most realistic vampire film ever made. And it turns out that Murnau is using his lead actress Greta Schroeder as the chip in his Faustian contract with this creature. Now, in the film, John Malkovich plays F.W. Murnau. Now again, this is not an accurate portrayal of what the real Murnau was like, but that's also not the point of the movie. In the movie, Murnau is used as almost a metaphor or a caricature of the obsessed director. And in the film, Malkovich basically plays Murnell as a sociopath, like he is an absolute tyrant on the set and is borderline abusive to his cast and crew. And he's also more than willing to put the lives of his cast and crew in danger just for the sake of the film, and he also totally sells out his lead actress to a literal monster. So in a way, Murnell is the true villain of the film, more so than the vampire itself. Now, in the film, Willem Dafoe plays Max Schreck or Count Orlok, and he gives an outstanding performance. Now, in real life, Max Schreck was a normal actor who's been in other things besides Nosferatu. He was actually a well-known stage actor in Germany at the time. But again, this is sort of a what-if story, and in the fictional universe of this film, he actually is a vampire. Now, Max Schreck is not the character's real name. In the movie, we find out that he doesn't even remember his own name, and he can't even fully remember how he became a vampire. All he really remembers is that it was apparently a woman that made him a vampire, yet he can't remember what she looked like or anything. And it's this really sad, almost pathetic portrayal of a vampire. And you almost get a sense that this vampire is a shell or a shadow of what he once was. It's also implied that he was once a king, either a king of vampires, or maybe he was a king in his human lifetime, and there's a point in the movie where Murnell gives him a bottle of blood while Schreck is hiding out in the cellar of the castle where they're shooting, and as he's drinking from the blood, he laments the fact that there was a time he once drank from golden chalices. There's also a point in the movie where he says that he read the novel Dracula, and he deconstructs the novel in a really interesting way. And Merhige talked about on the audio commentary for the movie this whole idea that, yes, he's immortal, but his body still ages. So it's almost like the downside of what it would be like to be immortal. It actually reminds me of, there's this really good song by Rush called Xanadu, which is about a man who goes on a quest for immortality, but by the end of the song realizes that immortality is more of a curse than a gift, and by the end of the song he's hopelessly insane, begging for death. And that's the sense you get from the vampire in this film, and the character of Max Schreck is sympathetic, but he's also genuinely creepy, and is also quite funny as well. Especially when they're filming the movie, you can tell that he's kind of getting into it and is really enjoying the spotlight. I also like how in the movie you could tell that Schreck is becoming interested in the filmmaking process, and I love the idea of an ancient vampire becoming interested in film. Also in the movie, you find out that one of the things a vampire desires most is to see the light of the sun, something that he can't see without dying, but then he watches a little film clip of a sunrise, and it's actually a pretty powerful and even moving moment in the film. It's also a great metaphor for how film can be a form of escapism, because the vampire is using film to escape the harsh reality of his existence. And when Schreck gives Murnell more than he bargained for, you basically get a battle of wits between these two monsters. A human monster and a supernatural monster. But the human monster might be the more evil of the two. And Dafoe just disappears into this role. And I think there's definitely a reason both him and the makeup effects artist for this film were nominated for Oscars. You also have the great Udo Kier as Albin Grau. You also have Cary Elwes as Fritz Wagner. You also have Eddie Izzard as Gustav von Wadenheim, whose name I'm definitely butchering, who is the actor who played Thomas Hutter or Jonathan Harker in the original Nosferatu. And then you have Catherine McCormack as Greta Schroeder, who is the actress who played Ellen or Mina in the original Nosferatu. But yeah, Shadow of the Vampire, I think, is a brilliant movie, and it's also a criminally underrated film. Now, when this movie came out, I think it was well-reviewed by most of the mainstream critics, and as I pointed out already, this was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, but I don't believe it did too well financially, and as the years went by, it's become kind of a forgotten film, which I think is a goddamn shame. At the same time, I can kinda to understand why this movie didn't really have a lot of mainstream appeal at the time, because again, it's about the making of Nosferatu, and sure, Nosferatu is one of the most important pieces of film history, and people know about Nosferatu, but Nosferatu is one of those movies that mainly hardcore film buffs know about, and really this is almost a movie more for hardcore film buffs, and I could see the movie not really appealing to mainstream audiences. But I do love this movie. I think it balances horror, comedy, drama, fiction, and actual history really well. And the movie is definitely a love letter to cinema and filmmaking, while simultaneously also being kind of a condemnation of cinema. Because the movie plays on this idea of film being a kind of a vampire. In the movie, there's a scene where Greta is complaining to Murnell that she had to turn down several roles in plays to be in his movie, and he says, "Why would you want to be in a play when you could be in a film?" And she says, "The theatrical audience gives me life." Then she points to Murnell's camera, whereas that thing merely takes it from me. And Murnell is constantly telling his cast and crew that through the art of filmmaking, they will achieve a kind of immortality, that the images that they make will be shown for generations to come, long after they're dead. But here's the thing. Films are merely moving images of things already done. Yes, future generations will see Nosferatu, but all they will be seeing are the ghosts and shadows of actors long dead. And also, even though the movie is about a film that was made in the 1920s, you could also look at the film as a commentary on the film industry in the 90s and early 2000s. Hell, this is still relevant to even today, the idea of the film industry being a kind of a vampire. Some actors and filmmakers find success and achieve a quasi-immortality through stardom, whereas others just have their hopes and dreams sucked from them. You could also look at the F.W. Murnell character. Again, this is not what the real F.W. Murnell was like at all, but you could look at John Malkovich's Murnell as being sort of a metaphor for these directors or producers or even actors who do horrible things and are allowed to get away with it and are still allowed to make movies, i.e. people like Roman Polanski, or granted this movie came out before all the sexual abuse stuff came out about Harvey Weinstein, but even at this time there were people in Hollywood who knew about all the shit with Weinstein, and even before all the sex stuff, Weinstein already had a reputation for being a bully in Hollywood. Even to this day, there are people in the film industry who abuse their cast and crew, who exploit their cast and crew, and I think that's definitely a commentary that the film is making. There's also a really creepy and kind of uncomfortable scene towards the end of the movie where Greta realizes that her co-star, Max Schreck, actually is a vampire when she sees that he casts no reflection in the mirror, and she understandably freaks the fuck out because of this, but then the men on the crew who are all in on this drug her so they could get on with the shooting. And you get this sense that Greta is nothing more than a sacrifice being offered up not to the vampire, but to the film, as if the film is some kind of bloodthirsty evil god, and Murnell and his crew are just a cult worshipping this god. I also gotta point out that Malkovich has several monologues in this film about the art of filmmaking that are actually kind of poetic and maybe border a little on pretentious, but at the same time the movie is sort of making fun of pretentious filmmakers, so I don't know how much you could criticize it for that. But yeah, I highly recommend Shadow of the Vampire. Again, it's a film that maybe would be more accessible to film buffs, or at least people who have seen the original Nosferatu, or at least, like, know about the original film. I feel like you definitely have to at least know about the original Nosferatu in order to really appreciate this, but if you have seen the original film, definitely check this movie out. I think this works as a really interesting sort of metafictional commentary on the original film and on film in general. Now, before I end this video, I want to cut to my friends Christian Feliciano and Jeremy Schwartz, both of whom are regular guests in my videos, giving their thoughts on Shadow of the Vampire.
This movie, Shadow of the Vampire, is one of the reasons why Willem Dafoe is one of the greatest actors of all time. He's one of my favorite actors. And it's because he can become a whole different person. Yes, he has his Willem Dafoe-isms, but this is one of the examples where none of those really come out. He's playing a whole different person. In fact, when I first saw this film, and I already knew who Willem Dafoe was when I was little, but when I saw this film, I didn't realize that was Willem Dafoe in the makeup. I didn't realize he was playing Max Schreck. I had no idea. Because he becomes a whole different person, and he plays him so great, and you can see how, the story of the idea of the movie is that Max Schreck was actually a real vampire. And you can see, if you were taking it seriously, you could be like, okay, I could kind of see how they fell for that. Of course, this is all fake, But I'm just saying that the way he plays him is so awesome, so brilliantly, and I love it. I love it to death. I love how they reshot scenes from Nosferatu. I love that, they're trying to keep him on track because he's trying to feed on the actress, or wants to feed on the actress, but they're trying to keep him, stay making the film. I think this is a really brilliant film. It has its creepy stuff in it, but it's played almost to where you can just kind of laugh at the bizarreness of Max Schreck's character. I think that's fantastic. This kind of, in a way, reminds me of Ed Wood. And not that Ed Wood, they're not saying that Ed Wood was a vampire, obviously. But Ed Wood was about, a film about a movie director, or the making of a movie. Which, they show his other films and stuff, but, they really show you Plan 9 from Outer Space. They reshoot scenes like that. Well, this is almost like that. Or like in Pasolini, which, coincidentally, Willem Dafoe also plays Pasolini. They show you scenes from Salo, and they're showing you how that was made and stuff. This kind of feels like that, except it takes a more fantastical turn. And if you really love just great films in general, doesn't matter if you like old horror or not, even though you'll appreciate it more if you like old horror films, and especially if you like Nosferatu. But if you just like film, if you just like the art of film, I definitely recommend you check this movie out. You will not be disappointed. This is a great film. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
I really enjoyed Shadow of the Vampire. I think that it does a great job blending fact with fiction. Of course, we all know that Max Schreck wasn't really a vampire, but this movie portrays him as such, and it's perfectly horrifying to see. I must say, the cast is great in this movie, especially John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe perfectly imitates Max Schreck's movements, and I just love the voice and accent. I also love how they really make Willem Dafoe look exactly like Max Schreck did in Nosferatu. The makeup job is outstanding, and it really helps you believe that Willem Dafoe is this horrible creature. John Malkovich also does a really good job as F.W. Murnau, who, over the course of the film, loses his sanity as the strain of keeping his deal with this vampire takes its toll on him. He has this drive to finish his movie no matter what the cost is, even if that means sacrificing a human life. I must say, I really enjoyed watching the arguments between Murnau and Schreck because it's like a power struggle between the two, and Murnau is slowly but surely losing. I also liked how you get some insight into Max Schreck, especially during the scene that takes place by the fire. He's a lonely vampire who criticizes the book Dracula for being unrealistic. And I must say, he actually makes you feel a little sympathy for him because he's so lonely and doesn't remember much about his past or who he even is. You've also got a great supporting cast with actors like Udo Kier, Eddie Izzard, and Cary Elwes. It's great to see the filming of scenes from Nosferatu recreated, and all in all, it's just a great movie, and I highly recommend it.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed Christian and Jeremy's thoughts on this movie. That was my review on Shadow of the Vampire, and this wraps up my series of Nosferatu reviews. Again, Nosferatu, it's not officially a franchise, and this was hardly the last movie to be based on Nosferatu, I know there was one from 2018 called Mimesis Nosferatu. I don't know if I'm saying the name of that right, but apparently it's about like a drama school that's doing a play based on Nosferatu, and the play comes to life. And there are currently 2 Nosferatu remakes in the works. There's one that's apparently been in production for several years now, with Doug Jones playing Count Orlok. And Robert Eggers is also doing his own remake of Nosferatu with Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok. Now, the next franchise that I want to tackle for Horror Month is the Blind Dead series. So my next movie review will be on the 1972 Spanish horror film Tombs of the Blind Dead. So stay tuned for that review, and bye.